Morning, good morning. If you're watching this afternoon, then good afternoon. If you're watching this after midnight, then go to bed, because you can't learn Greek after midnight. There's just no way you can learn Greek that late in the evening. Well, maybe some of you. I don't know. If your brain functions better after midnight, maybe you could do it. I never could. You got to concentrate. Anyways, let's look at the imperative mood today. We're in chapter 33. I'm going to put up a little Luke 1 to 4, the beginning of Luke, first 4 verses. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it's a good example of everything you've learned so far. Nearly everything that you've learned appears in these 4 verses. The infinitive, participles, you got some really good, subordinate clauses. You get the subjunctive in there, which you learned last chapter. So anyways, we're going to take a look at it. I'm just going to kind of speed through it, but you can slow down and see if you can translate, pause the video, see if you can point out or figure out the constructions that I'm pointing to here. But it begins with epideiper. Now, if you were just going to begin translating this, you probably have to look up that word because it's not a vocabulary word. You would simply find it in the lexicon as epideiper. It just means in as much as, okay? That's not a word we use very often, but Luke uses it, and it opens the Gospel of Luke. So, in as much as polloi. And we know polloi, right? In as much as many. Now, what have many done? Well, many, epikereson, and we recognize epikereson, right? It's an aorist, active, indicative verb. It looks like it's third person plural. Looks like polloi is the subject. In as much as many have, we don't know necessarily what it means, but you might recognize care in the middle of it, which means hand, okay? This word means taken to hand, to I take it into hand, to undertake something, basically. So, inasmuch as many have undertaken anataxasthai. Now, there you might recognize a word that is an infinitive. We learned it last chapter, the infinitive. So, you're employing here something you just learned. But this is an infinitive, right? Anataxasthai. It comes from anatasomai, so you might recognize that this is middle, right? This is aorist middle, and it's middle because it's deponent. Anataxasthai means something like to set down, okay? The sort of root tasso in there means to touch or to set, and this is anataxasthai, to set down. So inasmuch as many have undertaken to set down, okay? It's an infinitive, so you undertake to do something, okay? So that this is a complementary infinitive used with this verb. So, inasmuch as many have undertaken to set down what? To set down a narrative, a diegesin. It's in the accusative, it's the object of the infinitive, to set down a narrative or an account. An account of what? Well, peri, tone, and then you get this this great participial phrase, okay? And the phrase, I've marked it off here in yellow, tone pepleropharemenon. It's a long participle, and you might notice that it includes a word that we sort of know, plerao, we know as fill, I fill. And this is pe plera, and then it has some others in there. The root meaning is kind of to fill, but it means to accomplish, as in to fulfill, okay? And this is perfect. Peple, you see the reduplication on the front. It's a perfect participle. And think about that for a second. This is about the many who have undertaken to set down a narrative concerning the things which have been fulfilled. And it's perfect tense. So it's not just the things that were fulfilled in the past. It's the things that have come to completion but that have lasting effects in the present. Okay? These are the things that have been fulfilled, and that fulfilling has a lasting effect in the present. Okay? Luke uses a perfect here intentionally to communicate that the things that were fulfilled have a present, ongoing reality. We're living in the results of that fulfillment, right? That's cool, right? And I have bracketed off this clause, or this phrase, because you get tone, and then the participle, pepleropharemenon, and then pragmaton. And progmatone, see the phrase goes all the way from tone, progmatone. And progmatone is the noun that the participle is modifying. They're all in the genitive, but the participle's modifying this noun, and the article up front sort of bounds the phrase from the beginning, and then progmatone at the end. And you see there's a modifier, a prepositional phrase, in heimin in the middle of it. So, concerning the things which have been fulfilled among us in heimin. Okay? Progmatone, by the way, is just the matters or the things. So that's how we would translate it. So the first verse there, inasmuch as many have undertaken to set down a narrative or an account concerning the things which have been fulfilled among us. Now verse 2. Kathos, even as or just as, what? Just as paredoson. Now this is from a word that we don't know yet, but it means to give or to hand down. This para you recognize as kind of a handing down. This is a handing down, but who is doing the handing down? We could recognize this son at the end of the verb as a third plural ending. But what is the subject? Just as, and then there's a hoi, just as kathos paredoson heimin hoi. And that hoi is going to introduce our subject. It's nominative plural. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for we have a third plural verb. We're looking for a nominative plural subject. And here we have it, hoi, but it's longer than what you might expect. It goes all the way from hoi, and then you skip all that stuff in the beginning that's in green, and you land on genomenoi. Hoi, genomenoi. Genomenoi you might recognize as a participle. And it's a participle of, yes, you guessed it, genomai, something you might recognize here. It's a participle of genomai, so it's the ones who were, right? Very simply, the ones who were. There are a couple of other nominatives in this phrase, though. And those nominatives are predicate nominatives of genomai, you know, so the ones who were what? The ones who were autoptai. You hear optic in there, opt, and you hear auto, self. You hear eyewitnesses, right? Autoptai. The ones who were eyewitnesses. And then aparcase from the beginning. Kai huperetai. This is servants. Huperetai is servants, underlings. Huper, it's sort of a, anyways, you get the idea. Servants. So the ones who were eyewitnesses from the beginning and servants to lagu of the word. So those are the people who handed down to us. Okay. All right, so even as those who were eyewitnesses from the beginning and servants of the word have handed down to us. So what he's saying is, inasmuch as other people have written down the things accomplished among us, that is, the same things that have been from eyewitnesses and servants of the word have been handed down to us. Then verse 3. Then, not until verse 3 do we get our actual main verb of this sentence. This is one long sentence. And so, edoxe is our main verb, and you see dakeo there. Dakeo is it seems or I seem. This is a third singular, and it means it seems, or you could say it seems good, right? And that's sort of the meaning here. With kamoi, kamoi is just kai and moi. It seems good, moi, to me, kai, also. It seems good to me, also. And then we get this participial phrase. A dative participle, pare kaluthe kati. You hear akalutheo in there? I follow, but it's par akalutheo. I follow along. So it seems good to me as one who has followed, right? Does that make sense? As one having followed. Anothen, from the beginning, pasin, all things, akrobos, carefully. Okay? So, as one who has followed all things from the beginning, carefully, and then we get another phrase here, kathexes soi grapsai. And this is orderly to you to write. Okay, now you see, it seems good should be followed by an infinitive at some point, and the infinitive comes later in the verse, grapsai. Grapsai, it seems good to me to write. and not just to write in any way, but to write in a successive, orderly, a kathexes, orderly way. Okay? To you, soy, kratiste, most excellent, or most beautiful, Theophilus. Okay? Then, verse 4, hina epignos, so that, epignosko, you may know. But it's not just gnosko, you may know, but it's epignosko. It's you may know fully, so that you may know fully concerning the things which, and we have a hone, hone relative pronoun here, relative clause. So you may know what, tain ospheleon, at the end you get a direct object. You may know the certainty, the truth, ospheleon. You may know the certainty, and then this prepositional phrase goes in the middle, concerning the things which katekathes. You hear catechism, katekeo, concerning the things which you have been instructed, right? So this Theophilus has been taught some things, and Luke is writing so that he and others may know, but not just know fully the truth or the certainty of the things which they've been taught, right? So you see there's some beautiful things. This perfect participles communicating the things being fulfilled but having a lasting effect among us. You see eyewitnesses mentioned. You see that Luke has followed carefully, has akalutheo, sort of to follow with his mind all the things from the beginning, right? And now he's going to write a successive account. Anyways, I think the Greek really gives you an idea of what's happening. It forces you to slow down and look at things that you might not ordinarily notice in the English. You especially wouldn't notice that this is a perfect tense participle, or this form of the verb gnosko, not just gnosko, but epignosko is used. Anyways, just want to give you a little taste of some Greek that is in the New Testament that you will be translating at some point, okay? So, let's move on to the imperative mood, all right? Now, we talked about moods. The subjunctive mood was a kind of attitude towards reality, and the subjunctive indicated a possibility, the realm of potentiality. Well, the imperative is another attitude towards reality, but it's a volitional, a want, or it's a command, right? So I want something to happen, so I command it. That's the kind of relationship we're talking about. The imperative we have in English as a command in the second person. So a command, study, would always imply a you subject. There's an understood second person subject you involved in the command in English. Now in Greek there's a greater range, so it's not just a second person command, but in Greek you can also have a third person command. So let them study, or have them study. We don't really have an equivalent in English, so that's the best we can do, is something like let them or have them study. Okay? But you could also have a second person command in Greek and just study. Now, you notice here we're outside of the indicative, so time is less important. And what's important? Aspect. As we've talked about so many times, you're probably beginning to get tired of us talking about aspect all the time. In any case, the imperative aspect is important. If you have a present imperative, and I say study, with a present imperative, I'm implying that I want you to study continuously, to study in an ongoing way. But if, say, we have 10 minutes before a test, and I say study in an aorist, I just want you to study maybe at a point in time, but it's really just undefined. It would just be study. Okay, but a present would indicate a kind of ongoing study. Okay, does that make sense? Aspect, we have gotten used to hearing about aspect, so it shouldn't be too hard. One thing we don't have very often are perfect imperatives, and I just want to mention there are a few perfect imperatives, but as they only occur, there are only 4 of them in the New Testament. We won't talk about them in detail in this chapter. Sorry about that, but if you want to learn the perfect imperative, there are other grammars out there for you. And if you're outside of the New Testament, you probably would, because you'll see some perfect imperatives. Not that you wouldn't recognize the reduplication and these same morphemes on a perfect imperative. It's not that hard to recognize. Let's move on. Here's how you form a present imperative. You take the present tense stem, a connecting vowel, and then the imperative morpheme. No different from the way we form other things, really. Just have to learn new morphemes for the imperative. And in this case, we get a third-person singular imperative that he's showing us here, just as an example, lueto. How do you form an aorist imperative? Well, very similar. You take the tense formative, sa. You take the imperative morpheme, and you take the unaugmented aorist tense stem. So that unaugmented tense stem, because we're outside of the indicative, there will be no augment. Let's take a look at the morphemes. The morphemes are to, te, to, son. You see the third singular, second plural, and third plural. Notice that the second singular is a question mark on Mounce's graph here, Mounce's chart. And it's a question mark because the second singular is often not as regular. So you just have to memorize the second singular, and you'll see why in a minute. They just don't follow any sort of normal pattern. They're sort of irregular. So you just have to memorize those. But the rest follow a perfect pattern. To, te, to, son for the active, and the aorist passive also takes those active imperative morphemes. No big deal. We've seen the aorist passive take active things elsewhere, and they do here. So the active and the aorist passive will have to, te, to, son for the morphemes, and then the middle passive will have sto, te, sto, son, right? Remember that? Sto, ste, sto, son. Say it 3 times fast. Slow, te, slow, son. Te, te, slow, son. Anyways, that's fun. We'll see that on the verb luo here, lue and luson for the second singular there. You see that is the present and the aorist coming across, right? So I give you present and aorist there. The present lue, second singular, and then the aorist luson, second singular, are a little bit irregular. You want to memorize those. But you see to, te, to, son perfectly regular in the present, and then to, te, to, son in the aorist with the sa tense formative, perfectly regular. This is the active imperative. Now you'll notice luete and lusate are both very similar to the indicative. That's okay. You won't often confuse, but it is ambiguous to have a second plural imperative. It could be indicative. So here's the middle imperative. You'll notice some similarities. Luci, the aorist middle imperative there, second singular, looks a little bit like our aorist active infinitive. Remember, infinitive luci. That's what our second singular middle imperative looks like. Sorry about that. You won't often get those confused though either, because you'll usually be expecting an infinitive after some sort of verb, or with a neuter singular article and a preposition or something else. You probably won't confuse this, because this imperative will come right at the beginning and you'll be expecting a kind of command, right? Loose, or loose for yourself. So, lu'u looks a little bit like, you remember how the imperfect was formed in the second singular, elu'u, okay? It had an augment on it, but here we don't have an augment, but it looks similar, does a similar thing here. You'll notice the second singular, irregular, you'll want to memorize those, but the rest, sto, ste, sto, son, perfectly regular, and those won't give you any problems. You'll see the tense formative is there in the aorist, perfectly regular. Now, for the passive, you see the tense formative for the aorist passive is they, just like you would expect. The second singulars, again, a little bit strange, have to memorize those, but you'll notice on the aorist passive, to, te, to, son, no problem. Obviously, the present passive is the same as the present middle. And let's look at the second aorist. Here's a second aorist. Labe would be your second aorist active, okay? Genu would be your second aorist middle, and grapheti, your second aorist passive. You'll notice to, te, to, son, sto, ste, sto, son, and then the aorist passive. Again, to, te, to, son. Let's look at some odds and ends. Aside from those forms, you'll want to take a look at the chart that Mounce gives you on contract verbs. Contract verbs do a little bit of vowel contraction when they're in the imperative, and you just want to make sure you'll notice, hey, this is a contract, this is how it contracts in the imperative. It's no big deal, you don't have to memorize the contract verb chart, but it's on page 313 if you want to have a gander. And one thing to notice is that alpha contracts, they just have that alpha all the way through for the imperative. So agapa, agapato, agapate, you'll notice has that alpha all the way through. So you won't see the normal connecting vowel in those. And you'll see some similarities in the second singular imperative of an epsilon contract. You notice poie, do, looks a lot like this third singular indicative. Okay? Don't worry, like I said, you won't often get those confused, but there you have it. Those are your contract verbs. And also under that is the verb eimi in the imperative. You have isthi, which looks a little bit strange, and esto, este, estoson. So again, the second singular of eimi imperative is a little bit strange, isthi, but then the rest of them, to, tetoson, no problem. So, if you, just a minute on parsing. I missed the parsing there. Parsing, you'll just say present active imperative, second person singular or third person plural, whatever, from such and such verb, meaning this. Now let's talk about meaning. It's obviously a command. Now, if I were to give you a command, say, akaluthe me. You notice here, Luke 5:27, follow me, akaluthe me. Now, this is cool because it's a present active imperative. Follow me. In Luke 22:10, it's akaluthesate, auto. This is talking about when the disciples go into the village and they're looking for the man, they're looking for the things to prepare the meal in the upper room, and Jesus says, when you find such and such person, follow him into the house, or follow them into the house. And so he says follow him. As a command, it's aorist, right? You see the sate. Now, Jesus gives a command to follow him into the house. That's a sort of single, one-time action, right? But when every time Jesus tells somebody to follow him, when he says follow me, it's in the present. Can you think of any exegetical significance behind the present imperative here? Right. So the present imperative, obviously here we're talking about continuous aspect. And every time Jesus says, akaluthe moi, follow me, it's not just a single following. It's a continuous following. It's a present active imperative. The present tense has this continuous force, and Luke and the other gospel writers use the present tense to convey this kind of following. It's not a one-time following, it's a continuous following, an ongoing following of Jesus, right? So that's a good contrast to see there, and good sort of significance. Something you definitely wouldn't see in English. We don't have that in English. We don't have a way to say those things. We'd have to add an adverb or something, follow continuously, but they don't do that in translation. So you see there some significant things. In fact, I couldn't find an example of akalutheo in the New Testament where it was used as a present imperative when it wasn't used for following Jesus. It was always follow me. And in the aorist, it's following other people, but only time in the present is when following Jesus. So let's talk about entreaty. Obviously, the imperative is a command, but you can't give a command to God, or you really wouldn't want to. So when they say, Lord, teach us to pray, it's a kind of entreaty. It's a polite command. You entreat someone. And then, as we just talked about, aspect is part of this meaning, and you want to keep an eye on that. So there you have it with akalutheo is a good example. Let's look at prohibitions and negation. As we talked about before, negation with the imperative, since it's outside of the indicative, negation will use may. So if we want to say do not do something, we'll use may with the imperative. But there are a lot of ways to negate something or prohibit something. Okay, so you could say thou shalt not, and in that case you would use u plus the future indicative. You're prohibiting, through simple negation, the future act of something. Thou shalt not commit adultery. If you wanted to imply some other, or use a more sort of forceful prohibition, you could use may with a present imperative, and it would be something like do not worry about your life. And there it would be more in the present tense because it has this continuous aspect. It would be present, ongoing, right? Do not worry, do not continue to worry, do not go on worrying about your life. May plus the aorist imperative would be also a little more forceful than the future indicative because it's sort of prohibiting the act of something now. It's not just like the u plus the future indicative is prohibiting sort of a future act, but may plus an aorist imperative or may plus a present imperative is kind of prohibiting something now. So the aorist imperative would be like, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, and it would be an undefined sort of prohibition here. It wouldn't have that continuous force like the present, like we saw, but do not let your left hand know. It's an undefined aspect. So there you see pretty simple. I mean, these things you would sort of figure out. You already know most of this stuff. But then also you could have, like we learned with the subjunctive, you could have some negation with the subjunctive. And on page 314. But the may plus aorist subjunctive as a prohibition is a little bit stronger than the first that we talked about when we talked about plus a future indicative, thou shalt not commit adultery. That's prohibiting a future act. May plus the subjunctive, aorist subjunctive, would prohibit a future act, but prohibit it more strongly. So, do not think I have come to abolish the law. Okay? And so, it's a more forceful way, and then there's yet a more forceful way, and that is may plus the aorist subjunctive. My words will most certainly not pass away. It's inconceivable. Now, that's a case of what we like to call over-translation, but in any case, that gives you an idea of how forceful it might be. You wouldn't want to translate it like that. But words like never, not at all, by no means, you might see, or you might use to translate. There is an equally forceful way of saying something. Remember how we talked about the subjunctive is the possibility, potentiality. It's this realm not of actuality, but of potentiality. And to deny a potential something is denying even more forcefully, because you're saying not even the possibility of this could happen. Not even the possibility of my words passing away will I allow. So may plus the optative is even more in the realm of possibility. It's even further from probability, okay? So the optative we won't learn. There are only a few examples of it in the New Testament, but it is another mood in Greek, and it does denote a further into the realm of less likely possibility, okay? But often it's used in prayers, so may I be blessed, okay? Might be in the optative or something like that. In any case, may plus the optative is an extremely forceful way to deny something, because you're denying even the least likely possibility of this happening. And Paul uses this may genoita, may it never be. He uses it 14 times. And that phrase appears 15 times in the New Testament, so 14 times in Paul. But he uses it often after things like, should we go on sinning so that grace may abound? May it never be. In no way, by no means, let this happen. So it's one of the most forceful ways you can negate something. So Mounts wants you to know that, so that when you see it, if you see it, you'll know what it means. Let's go on to a summary. So the imperative, we have commands, entreaties. We have second and third person. Let them pray, let them study. We have aspect, and this is difficult to translate, but we saw a little bit how to communicate this, or to at least emphasize this. If you see a present command, follow me, you'll want to emphasize that continuous aspect. Not just in your translations, but in your teaching and preaching. Obviously, we keep saying that. Teach and preach. We want you to teach and preach the Bible, and we want you to use Greek to do it. So, imperative morpheme chart, you saw second person singular needs to be memorized, but the others are pretty regular. 5 prohibitions, we saw sort of how to prohibit things, and then we introduced this sort of may plus the optative. And the imperatives sort of fit in there in the prohibitions, how you would prohibit things. So look over those. Those are good for emphasis, because that may plus the subjunctive, you'll want to know sort of where that fits, and how strong is the prohibition, how forceful is it. So, apolumi. Let's look at vocabulary. That's what's next. Apolumi. I destroy, kill. In the middle, it's I perish or die. Apoluo. I release. I loose away, loose from. I release. Ate. If or whether. You see that and if, ate. So if or whether. Now let's parse. Not many vocabulary words this chapter, were there? Only 3. If we want to parse blepetoson, how would we do it? You would want to look at the toson at the end, and that might indicate to you, suggest to you that we're in the imperative, especially since this is the chapter where we learn the imperative. Blepetoson, it is imperative. What person and number is it? Well, son we have seen often in third person plural, so this is indeed third person plural. That to we see with imperative, so toson, this is imperative third person plural, And the root that we're seeing, blepo, it's there's no tense formative. We're just seeing the present tense stem, so present active imperative. And it would be let them see, third person plural. Let them see. Have them look. But it would be a kind of ongoing looking, right? Have them continue to look. Have them look at. What about ekbleitheti? Here's one that you might not immediately recognize, but the they might communicate to you aorist passive. We are indeed in the aorist imperative, aorist passive imperative. This is a second person singular. It's one of the ones that's a little bit irregular. You'll have to memorize that T is the way that a lot of these aorist passive second singular ones end. Ekbleitheti. Ekble, by the way, is from ekbalo. And if you'll notice here, ekbalo changes its stem in the aorist to ekble, and they goes on as the tense formative, T as the participle morpheme. So, aorist passive imperative second singular, how would you say this? Be cast out. It's sort of passive, right? So, be cast out. Lalu. Lalu is from a verb that we know that's familiar, laleo, but this would be what? Imperative, present, middle passive, and it would be second singular. It's one of those that's a little bit irregular, so you have to memorize and know that the second singular present imperatives often end in this u in the middle passive. So, how would we translate that? Present, middle passive, imperative, second singular. If it's passive, it's be spoken. If it's third person, if it's middle, rather. If it's passive, be spoken. If it's middle, then it would be, what, speak for yourself? Something like that. Akua. Akua. Command. This is like here, okay? So I sort of give it away by saying here. It is present active imperative. It's second singular. A lot of these present active imperatives in the second singular just end in an epsilon, and so you'll notice akua is how this one goes. So present active imperative, second singular. Akua means hear or listen. Hear, O Israel. Akua, O Yisrael. So hear or listen. Itesai. Here we have what? Itesai from iteo. But what would we say? Itesai, we see a sa there, right? This is going to be aorist. It's going to have this sa tense formative. But this second singular is a little bit strange. The aorist middle second singular ends in this psi, and you might get it confused with the aorist active infinitive, which also ends in psi. Here, actually, this would be aorist middle imperative second singular, and it would be something like ask, or if it's in the middle, ask for yourself. But up against itesai as the infinitive, there's actually a little bit different accent, and that's not always the case. You would only see a difference in the accent if the words were 3 syllables long or longer. With a word like lusai, you don't see any difference in accent between the middle imperative and that active infinitive in the aorist. But nonetheless, the infinitive is going to have a slightly different accent. It's going to be accented more like a noun, and you see the imperative is accented more like a verb with the accent sort of all the way back. Okay, that's enough of that. Just wanted to give you sort of a look at the similarities between the two, the infinitive and the imperative there. Okay, so moving on to the exercise number 11. This exercise, I want you to identify the verbs, look for them. Ha de paulos, tous entais ecclesiais. I haven't seen any verbs yet. Didasken. Oh, ooh, that might be a verb. That might be a verb. Sounds like didasko. Let's go ahead and highlight the verbs. If you want to pick them out yourself, then pause it. Here are the verbs. Didasken, and pistiusate, and then zate. So, didasken, what kind of verb is this? Well, we see an augment on the front. We know didasko is the lexical form. And is this the lexical form? Is this the same present tense stem as we see in the lexical form? Didask. Yes, it actually is. Didask. You'll notice present tense stem with an augment means imperfect. This is third singular, imperfect, and it means was teaching. But Paul was teaching tous entais ecclesiais, the ones in the churches, the people in the churches. But Paul was teaching the ones in the churches pistiusate. Any guesses about pistiusate? Any guesses? Yeah, pistuo, right? and we see sa in there, and we see te. So it could be aorist, active, indicative, second plural, or it could be aorist, active, imperative, second plural. Remember, those would be the same form. It could be indicative or imperative, but here we see at the beginning like this, fronted with an understood subject with no clear subject, and Paul speaking, it seems to indicate that it's imperative. Believe. Believe eis ton Jesun Christon, in Jesus Christ. Let's put up the parsings for those now, because we want to get to zate, and zate is not an aorist imperative. We don't see zao, that contract vowel would lengthen, and you get something like zesate in the aorist, something like that. And, or zasate, maybe zesate. Zate in the present, right, would be an ongoing command. So it's not just, it's live, right, but it's not just live undefined, it's live and continue. Go on living according to the thelema, the will of our Lord. So if you were going to bring out the aspect of the imperatives, but Paul was teaching past time but ongoing action, was teaching the people in the churches, believe in Jesus Christ and live, go on living continuously according to the will of our Lord. Right? That's good stuff. You could preach that. Let's look at the English to Greek, and then we'll be all finished with this imperative stuff. Let those women come and let them be baptized by the teacher. Those women would be, how would we say those women? You can pause the video, you can try to work out those women. You can try to think those is a form of ekanos. What case would it need to be in? Let them come is the verb, but those women is going to be the subject of that verb, okay? So those women is going to be nominative, it's going to be plural, it's going to be feminine, those is going to be feminine. So we would get something like, not ekanos, but ekenai in nominative plural feminine. And then hai gune would be the nominative singular, but gunakes would be nominative plural. So ekenai, hai gunakes. Then let them come. How do you say let them come in Greek? It's a command, so it's imperative. And it's not second person, it's actually third person here, because those women is the subject. So third person plural imperative of come. Well, we could use erkamai, but we would say let them come, and it's not necessarily an ongoing coming, so we would say aorist. What's the aorist of erkamai? It's elthon, right? Here we would use elthon, right? As our elth would be our aorist tense stem. And how do we add our roots? We would have to add toson to that for our third plural, so you get elthetoson, okay? So here, did we have elthetoson? Where is? Oh, okay. I just highlighted let them come. Now we have elthetoson. Okay. So now let's do let them be baptized. So let them be baptized. You would use baptizo, right? Now the root of baptizo is baptid, and then you would add this aorist tense formative, okay? But here it would be, what tense formative? It wouldn't be saw, we want passive, let them be baptized. So we would have a they tense formative, and it would be, again, third person plural. We'd add toson. So if you add all that together, baptid plus they plus toson, you get baptisthetoson. Now that baptid before the theta, that delta changes to a sigma. That's just one of these things that happen. So baptisthetoson. Let them be baptized by the teacher would be something like hupa by tu didaskalou, the teacher. So hupa tu didaskalou, and putting it all together, ekenai hai gunakes elthetoson kai baptisthetoson hupa tai, or hupa tu didaskalou. So that's it. That's your English to Greek. If you translate that sentence back, you'd see those women, let them come. So let those women come and be baptized by the teacher. Great. That's it. That's all for the imperative. It's not too bad. Most of the imperative has a clear English analog. That third person is a little bit strange, but we don't have any problems translating it as let them come, let them be baptized. So you see the imperative, does not have as great a range as we saw with the infinitive, where it's doing things with prepositions that are strange to us maybe, but it seems very natural because we use the imperative a lot, and in Greek you'll see it. Again, one of the places you'll see it most is in speech. So when somebody's speaking to someone else and giving a command, you'll see it. Or when Paul is writing to people in Ephesus or Corinth or wherever he might give a command in his letters. But those are the places that you'll see it. Okay, any questions about the imperative, just let me know. Hope this clarifies things and the video helps. Y'all have a good week, and I'm glad that you're almost to the finish. Take heart, there's only 3 more chapters left in Mounts, so when you get to chapter 36, we'll have a big party. But for now, you can have a big party that you're in chapter 33, and this is, I believe, the final mood. Maybe we could have a celebration about that. Because with chapter 33, you have now completed your knowledge of the Greek verbal system, all the moods. Now, that's something to celebrate. In the next chapter, we're actually going to learn a new kind of verb, and we're not going to do any more moods. So, celebrate, have some pizza tonight, or if you'd like to celebrate with a healthy snack, have some fruit, just to change things up a little bit. Have a good week. See ya.